Hello? All right. Okay, that works.
Great. Thank you. I'll give you the mic. You want this?
No, no.
Because this thing may be easier to use if you want to
show something, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying use it. Just pass it back to me.
All right. I think you can use both.
You can switch this off or use that one.
Yeah.
Just use this one or the one. Is you okay with this? Okay.
I can use both, right?
But don't use two because you have to.
I'm gonna, as soon as I use this one, I switch this off. Is that a deal? All right. Okay. So this microphone also works, so that's good. First of all, hello and welcome back to the next session. Let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Christian Teuschel. I work at the RIPE NCC, well, obviously, but I work in research and development there. And in this role, I deal a lot with data and also statistics and information. And this presentation is very much about data, statistics and information. And see this presentation as some kind of a preview or a sample of something that I have been working on for the last year, which is a project called Country Reports. And the idea behind the country reports is that we're gonna aggregate information and data. I'm gonna go into details a bit later on a country level and try to extract what kind of information or new insights we can deliver with that. And before I just heard that we have a bit of a limited time for this session. I was very optimistic and I created 42 slides. And I think I should just shut up and go into the content. Yeah, thank you very much. But it might be that I'm gonna have to skip some parts of the presentation. So, let's go in media res. And I said, you will see a lot of statistics in this presentation. And just to make clear why statistics are important, I think statistics are the only way to get unbiased and objective information. And you can use this information to shape informed decisions. I think the time of especially management being done by gut feeling, they're over, right? So I think data should be seen as a decision support if it comes to creating value or steering a company. The RIPE NCC provides 3 different data sets that I personally think are very important for the understanding of the internet. First of all, we have the RIPE database. So the RIPE database is something that we're gonna collect and maintain in the role of a regional internet registry. The next one is routing information. It's the so-called RIS system. That system collects routing information, and for, I think in simple terms, this is the routing table being collected from a lot of participants on the internet, and that's being stored and accessible via the RIPE NCC. And my colleague Oleg will talk about the RIS system tomorrow, so I'm not going too much into details. The next data set is RIPE Atlas. I guess every one of you have heard about RIPE Atlas. So that's why I'm also not going into the details. What you can, of course, you can look up both systems with the given URL. And what's, I think, especially good about this centralized data collection is that you can access all this data via RIPEstat. How many of you know about RIPEstat? All right, that's most of my colleagues. Interesting. Okay, RIPEstat is seen as an information service with the idea that we're gonna create one interface to a lot of data. And I just leave that in a room that it is a lot of data. because I think the usage of the system explains its kind of success in a way. So first of all, the system is being requested more than 35 million times per day, and that is coming from roughly around 1 million users. And I invite you to just check it out, go to stat.ripe.net, and just see what you're going to find there. I will also keep some references for all the data points that I'm going to put in there. All right, let's start with the actual topic of the presentation, that is Belarus in the regional context. I'm going to start with something very lightweight related to statistics, just to, you know, kindle your imagination and get you warm. So the data that I collected was for Belarus and its direct neighbors, which we're going to find here, which is Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, and Ukraine. And you might notice that I concluded Russia. That was intentional for the reason because Russia compared to Belarus would be a just unfair comparison. So that's why this data is left out. So let's start with something pretty simple. That is the landmass. So what you're going to see here is a column chart which shows simply the landmass of the countries. And if I can ask you to simply remember the ranking, then we have Ukraine as the biggest country, then we have Poland, and then Belarus. So let's keep these three in mind. If you're going to switch over to the population, then there's not a surprise, right? I mean, Ukraine is still the biggest country related to population. Then we have Poland, then Belarus. Now, what I want to focus on in this presentation are three main topics, and the fourth one, maybe if time allows it. The first one is IPv4 depletion. IPv4 depletion everyone heard about, and I think it's really important. The next one, and I think equally important, but maybe a topic that gets less attention, especially at meetings like ours, is internet and economy. The third one is IPv6, also very important. You might have heard about that as well a lot. And the last one would be optionally active measurements. Okay, let's start with the IPv4 depletion. And I want to show you some simple statistics on what is going on in a country. Here we're going to see the number of registered resources related to IPv4 for the 5 countries that we have in comparison. And you immediately see that there is already a change. Ukraine is not leading anymore. Poland is in the lead. And Belarus is definitely not on the 3rd position. You could right now also look at the historic development, because that could be also gain some insights into that. What we're going to see here is the development of registered resources for Belarus over the time of 10, 11 years. And what you're going to see there is in yellow is the allocations, the number of allocations, and the blue one is assignments. And in general, in Belarus, and I think that's also a pattern that we're going to see in Western European countries, allocations dominate the amount of registrations. I don't want to go into details because of the limited time, but here we're going to see the same graph for the neighbors. And what is kind of interesting, that in Poland and Ukraine, the assignments are very dominant. I have kind of a theory behind that, why that is, but I would like to put that as a discussion point, either later on in the questions, or we're going to talk about that in the coffee break. Now, you would say that the number of allocations and assignments is just one thing. What does that tell about the IP space? And I'm gonna show you that in the next graph. So what we're gonna see here is the translated IPv4 space related to allocations and assignments. That's also not surprising because allocations related to policy development are bigger in size. So they dominate this graph in a way. That allocations are bigger than assignment, you also see in the next one. Because even though that for Poland and Ukraine the assignments were dominant, this graph is in favor for allocation, because in one allocation we just have more IPv4 space. Now, I would like to include another statistic. And this is a data set that's not coming from us, that's coming from the World Bank. It's about the internet penetration. That means how many percentage of the population have access to internet, more or less regularly. And here we're gonna see again another picture. And if we're gonna focus on Belarus, we have 76% of internet penetration in Belarus. I would say that the internet penetration is not that helpful because I think it's just a metric made up for comparison. I think what's much more important is if we're gonna compare or if we're gonna combine the internet penetration with the population, because then we're gonna get to the internet users. And this is specifically important because whatever you see there is the amount of people that participate on the internet. And when I mean participate, then we are talking about people that use the internet, that get a mobile phone, that play around with a mobile phone, that are advertisement targets for Facebook, Google, and especially people that play around with the technology and learn something from that technology. And some of them might even have the guts to create a startup in that field. And I think this is a well-known fact that a lot of capitals in Europe right now are battling for being the startup hub of Europe. And that has a big reason, because in the last time we see that startups are the only job engine in the economy, because established companies, they become more efficient, they need less people, so it's up to the startups to create new jobs. Now, why did I show you that related to IPv4 depletion? And that's explained in the next one. This shows the number of internet users, which is rather high in Belarus, and the number of IPv4 space, which is rather little in Belarus. Now, if you're gonna divide that, then you're gonna get the number of internet users on one IPv4 address. And this is very relevant for IPv4 depletion, because you have the number of people that sit behind one IP address. And in this graph, Belarus is sticking out. That means that in Belarus, on average, statistically speaking, we have 3.5 people on one IP address. All right, the next one will show that it's getting even worse, because I added another data set. And this data set is the population growth. So what you're going to see there, whereas in all the other countries, you have less people on an IPv4 address, you also have a decreasing population. Apart from Belarus. In Belarus, you have an increase of population. So that means that situation is getting worse. Simple as that. Okay, then since we are already short on time, I'm gonna go to the next one. Internet and economy. And I would like to start that with a study done by the World Bank about building broadband strategies and policies for the developing world. What they did in this study, they correlated the development of the gross domestic product with the investments in telecom technologies. So they listed right now fixed telephony, mobile telephony, internet and broadband. And broadband had the biggest correlation. And if I quickly interpret this graph for you, that means if a country invests 10% or increases 10% its broadband within the country, then it will, on average, show, depending if it's a high-income country or a low or medium-income country, an increase of up to 1.38% of GDP. So for some countries, 1.3.8% of the GDP is the spending in military. So I think this is also very significant. And I think you can expect that right now I'm going to show you data related to the countries that we saw before. I normalize the GDP on per person so that we can compare the values, because otherwise it would be unfair. We're going to see that Belarus is not leading this stat. And I think at this moment only Ukraine is worse. And I tried to verify the study by the World Bank by adding the broadband subscriptions. So basically this is the amount of fixed broadband subscriptions for each country. And this is a surprising value, because what we're going to see there for Belarus is that it has the highest penetration of fixed broadband subscriptions within all these 5 countries. Yet it has almost the lowest GDP per capita. Now, right now I would like to look at the historic development, because, I mean, if you're going to look at these facts, you would rather say that the study of the World Bank is not true. And I think it's half true, or a bit more than half. Because what we're going to see there, in yellow, we're going to have the development of the GDP per capita, and the blue line is the fixed broadband subscriptions within Belarus. And for quite a long time, they were kind of correlated. So we're going to see an increase in the fixed broadband subscriptions, and we also see an increase in the GDP per capita, which basically means that the model used by the World Bank is correct. But what completely surprises me is that this trend is not consistent. And I would like to put that as the second discussion point later on in the break. What is going on there? Again, I have kind of a theory what could be the reason for it, but I would like to talk with experts from the local market to maybe either verify or reject my hypothesis. What you might find interesting is that the penetration of fixed broadband is going down. Because, I mean, this is kind of a weird situation. But I think it's explained by the data that we saw before. Because the penetration of fixed broadband subscriptions is related to population. So if you have a growth in population, but if you're going to stop to put money into broadband distribution, then of course it goes down. Then, let's quickly go to the next topic, which is IPv6. I'm going to show you the same graphs, just related to IPv6. What we're going to see there is that Belarus is doing not very well. And we can look at the historical graph compared to its neighbors. It is not doing very well. We can also look at the registered IPv6 space. It's also compared to the neighbors not a great thing. Then I would like to add also the results of another project that is usually quoted many times when we're going to talk about IPv6. That is a measurement project being done by ENOG with the help of Google. I can give you more details if you're interested in. But what they effectively measure is access networks and the customers that are coming to Google. And related to that project, we see the top players in the IPv6 market. There's, for example, Belgium India, and Germany. And then you're going to have Belarus somewhere further down in a way. So, as I said before, this interface, stat.ripe.net, provides you with a lot of the details that I presented. The system also supports country lookup, so you can look up a country. And I compiled all the visualizations that I used in the presentation on a special page where you can see the URL over there. And right now I would like to check with the timing if I can go into the last one. 2 minutes, that will be steep, will be a challenge, but I'm gonna go for it. Active measurements. Active measurements is the last part of these 3 different data sets. So we have registry data, we have passive measurements, which is routing, and then right now we have active measurements. And the difference is just that you actively need to send requests and collect the data. Whereas the passive measurements, the routing table comes basically to you and you just need to store it. So as an example of, as a huge and important example of active measurement network, I would like to show RIPE Atlas. And just recently we celebrated to have achieved 10,000 probes out there, so the measurement network is very big. But I'm not going into details right now about the network itself. What I would like to point out is that in Belarus we have 29 or 30, depending on what time you're going to look it up. We have 29 active probes in Belarus. And that is related to we have 29 active probes and 89 networks in Belarus. So that means that whatever I'm going to show you in the next parts is based on, in the best case, 30% of the network. So keep that in mind when we're going to interpret the next result. So there's a really nice project being done by one of my colleagues, Emil Aben. He created and named it IXB Country Jedi. The basic idea is to measure local traffic. How are we going to do that? We know what kind of probes are within a country. We control what kind of measurements they can do. And one of these measurement capabilities are trace routes. So if you're going to start to measure one probe and send a trace route to all the other probes, we call it mesh measurement, then theoretically the source and the target for your measurement is within the country, right? You would expect that if the network is being set up properly on a national level, that the data stays in the country. And right now I'm going to show you the results that we discovered based on the Atlas measurements. So on the left side you're going to see IPv4 and on the right side IPv6. What we're going to see there is that most of the traffic stays in the country, again based on in the best case 30% of the networks, but we also see kind of a bias towards Frankfurt. I mean, I would say DKIX. And I think we also have heard that before in a presentation that that DKIX was mentioned. And then not surprisingly, IPv6 is not really important, and that's why it also doesn't show up very lightly. Another data set or a representation of active measurements is MLab. If you're interested, I can give you details about how they're gonna collect the data. But what the result of this measurement was to identify the broadband capacities within the country. And before we saw the statistics from the World Bank about the fixed broadband subscriptions, that's being defined, well, broadband is being defined everything that's has more capacity than 256 kilobits. And as we see in this statistic is that around 50% of all the subscriptions have less than 5 megabits, and I would say 90% of the entire broadband providers are staying below 10 megabits per second. So again, I would put that as a discussion point as well. So I would like to hear your input on that. And to be complete, I also wanted to include on how many data points that's being collected, and it's around 1,000 data points. It's not necessarily a lot, but better than nothing. Then the last point of my presentation, and I think that still fits, is so the RIPE NCC runs also one of the root DNS servers, in this case KRoot, and we tried to use the Atlas probes to run a DNS measurement. And as you all know, KRoot is anycasted, so we have multiple instances, and it is very interesting to see from within Belarus at which nodes they're gonna resolve. And here you're gonna see the statistic over time, and you have a very strong bias towards Frankfurt, which we also saw before in the other IXP country Jedi, and Poznan, which is geographically very close, which kind of makes sense. As a simple comparison, here is also the graph for the entire ENOG region, and at which instances the nodes are terminating. And here we're going to see, of course, a wider distribution of the resolutions. And that brings me to the last one, which I welcome some questions.
Вопросы? Questions?
Any questions? Okay, second channel. My name is Ilya. I'm an official broker. IP addresses. Thank you for your interesting presentation. We're from Moscow. Are you planning to have similar presentations for Moscow in 2018? We have an analogy of Russia with other developed European countries, which correspond to Russia in terms of number of IP addresses or layers.
The question is very good. As I said, this presentation is kind of a preview and a sample for what we are going to release at the RIPE meeting in Dubai. And I would like to put it that way. So we try to cover or to answer these questions on a national level with the country reports. And let's, well, I would like to agree on that if by the next ENOG you can't find these answers on the country reports, then I'm going to prepare a presentation and come.
Okay, actually, we have a Telegram channel, so if you're watching webcast, you can answer your questions via Telegram. And there was only one question about this presentation Telegram channel, why it is made by a Dutch guy, but not a local Belarusian one.
Oh,
so
first of all, I'm not Dutch.
It was kind of a suggestion, not a question. So I hope in Moscow, together with Christian, for sure, some local guys, maybe including you, could make this presentation and submit it to program committee for everyone to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to correct that, I'm not Dutch. I'm Austrian, and that makes me kind of neutral, right?